Today we'll be sewing this dress from Tilly and the Buttons Billie Sweatshirt dress pattern. I'm going to show you what changes to the pattern I've made and how to make them. This is going to be Tilly and the Buttons Billie Sweatshirt dress hack, the view with balloon sleeves. These are all the pattern pieces I'm going to use. The back with 20 centimeters added to the length. I have also adjusted my seam allowances to be 8 millimeters because I'm going to construct the dress on the overlocker. The seam allowance in the pattern is 1.5 centimeters. The front also lengthened by 20 centimeters and with a line marked 28 centimeters from the armhole where my belt is going to be. I'm going to use eyelets, so I interfaced the spots where the eyelets will be installed. I'm going to show you how I prepared all the pieces in a second. Then we've got our sleeves with the head of each sleeve gathered. Tilly recommends 3 rows of basting stitches, but I do things differently. So I have gathered my sleeve heads with 1 row of basting stitches and added a bias cut stay tape after shaping the sleeves. Then we have our neckband. Mine is narrower, cut to 5 centimeters or 2 inches wide. That's just a personal preference. Next we have 2 cuffs. Of course you can use ribbing or contrast fabric for the neckband and the cuffs if you prefer. And this is a 5 centimeters wide strip of fabric, 4 centimeters longer than our front and back pattern circumference. That is going to be a tunnel for our belt. And finally our belt, mine is 5 centimeters or 2 inches wide. You can use grosgrain or satin ribbon if you want. I'm now going to show you how I prepare my pattern pieces to use my time more efficiently. I start with ironing the tunnel for the belt. I use prym pressing templates, but you can use cardboard or just measure your seam allowances and press to the wrong side of the fabric. My fabric curls, so I press it flat first, then fold 1 centimeter on each side under to the wrong side, and finally press it again from the top. I really need this crease. The crease is going to help me sew it to the dress, so I spent quite a long time pressing it. I use my clapper to help me. My fabric is cotton-based French terry, so I can use steam and cotton settings on my iron. Always test your iron settings on a scrap of fabric and use a pressing cloth if necessary. If you hate pressing, you can use a wider satin, cotton or grosgrain ribbon for the tunnel, but I like the feel and the look of my French terry. By the way, don't forget to like the video if you like it, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of my sewing videos. I'm using a 1 centimeter fold because I want to sew 3 millimeters from the edge of the tunnel. You can use a narrower fold if you want. Don't use a wide one, as it will make it more difficult to pull the belt through. The final step is to press the tunnel from the top, making sure my folded edges are flat underneath. And that's our tunnel done. We can move on to the dress front and fuse the little squares of interfacing. I marked a line across my front and back where I want my belt tunnel to be. Then marked the center point on the dress front under the line. My eyelets are going to be 2 centimeters from this point, so I marked the spots with an X, and I'm going to interface these points. It's a brilliant way to use your small scraps of interfacing. Just remember to always fuse them with the glue side on the fabric. The glue side has little spots of glue that are shiny, so you can see them. That's done, so now to the sleeves. I have gathered them on my basting stitches. I only use 1 row, but it's safer to use 2. I don't see the benefit of using 3, but you might. Anyway, my gathered sleeve heads are going to be stabilized with the stay tape cut on the bias with the cord in the middle. I press them to my sleeve heads, being very careful not to iron out my gathers. This tape still has a bit of give. It's only the very middle of it that is not going to stretch at all, so it's perfect for the job. The tape is 19 centimeters long. That's how much I need between my notches. I'm only interfacing the sleeve heads, and I'm doing it just on the edge. I don't want to iron out my gathers. Of course, you don't have to do it. I'm just showing you my ways of doing things. And now I'm using my tailor's ham to steam and reshape the sleeve head. I'm not pressing it. I'm just using the steam from my iron to reinvigorate the gathers. And all of it is repeated for the other sleeve. You can also press your hem when you are at your pressing station. So this dress has a straight hem, simple to press even when the dress is already constructed. Now I can move on to my hand press to install the eyelets. I keep my dies, eyelets and a sample of how they are installed, together with the description of what they are and their size, in a plastic bag and a separate box. This way nothing ever gets mixed up. The eyelets have two parts, the eyelet and the washer. I also have two dies, one fitting the bottom part, the other screwed on the top part of the hand press. It's very difficult to make a mistake. I don't have a cutting die in the right size, so I'm going to use the owl. As I'm using quite big eyelets, 8mm, I'm going to use extra interfacing to stabilize them. I'm going to trim off all the extra interfacing later, so there is no bulk. Of course, you can use a hand tool provided with eyelet sets and a hammer. The principles are precisely the same. The tool acts as dies in the hand press. I'm pushing the eyelet through the hole in the fabric, placing the extra interfacing squares over it on the wrong side of the fabric, then placing the washer on top of all that, and putting the eyelet over the bottom die, checking if the dies are lined up, and pressing the handle. Easy peasy hand press squeezy, and it's done. Brilliant if you are not very strong, as you really don't need to be. The other eyelet is installed in the same way, so eyelet through the hole, extra interfacing over the little base sticking out on the wrong side of the fabric, wash on top and press. Both eyelets are in. I'm going to trim away all the extra interfacing, being very careful not to cut into the fabric. You can use tearaway interfacing, but mine is heavyweight, so I prefer to trim it off. The extra interfacing makes the eyelets last for a very long time. We are done here, so we can move on to the overlocker in my case, or your regular sewing machine if you use it for the construction. As I might have mentioned, I do things differently, so feel free to follow Tilly's brilliant instructions, especially if you're a beginner. I'm going to set my sleeves in, not sew them flat. So I'm first sewing the back and front of the dress together at the shoulder seams, starting from the neckline towards the armhole. I haven't stabilized the shoulder seams, but you might, especially if you use a thinner jersey. You can use clear elastic, jersey trim, bias cut or knit interfacing, or even satin ribbon if you don't want any stretching whatsoever. Now I'm going to sew the side seams of my dress. Of course, if you attach your sleeves flat, you need to sew the sleeves now. But as I said, I'm setting my sleeves in. I start from the hem of my dress and sew up to the armhole, or in other words, I sew from the wider to the narrower point. As always, I sew in sections. I focus on the edges of my fabric being aligned between the notches. If the notches match, everything matches. This is a nice long seam, easy to sew. Don't pull or push your fabric, just guide it gently with your hands. Yes, I do keep my hands quite close to the needles sometimes, as this is the area where everything needs to be perfectly flat. My hands are important to control my fabric, but I never put my hand under the presser foot or over the blade of my overlocker. Notice that I never wear bracelets or bangles or even a watch, and my wrists are always bare when I sew. We can now sew the other side seam in the same way. So from the hem up and matching the notches. Of course, if you are using your regular sewing machine, use a stretch stitch. You might also need a jersey needle, but the rules are the same, so sew from the wider point to the narrower and match the notches. My side seams are done. I'm also going to sew the other elements, the other pattern pieces. I'm sewing the side seam of my sleeves. You'll have done this step when sewing the side seam of the dress if you are using the flat insertion method, so if you are following the pattern's instructions. I'm going to sew from the bottom of the sleeve up. It's a bell sleeve, very wide at the bottom. By the way, there is no better or worse sleeve insertion method. Do whatever works for you, whatever gives you better final results. And the other sleeve. I forgot to tell you that the fact I only have one line of gathering stitches doesn't just mean that I'm lazy. I simply used another method of gathering. My gathers are on the needle thread, not the bobbin thread. For the more common bobbin thread gathers, I'd use 2 lines of stitching. Let me know if you want a video comparing the 2 methods. Both have pros and cons, of course. We're done with the sleeves. I'll put them aside for now because it's easier to sew the belt tunnel to my dress when it's just the front and back. I don't need an extra fabric flopping around. I'm now sewing the neckband along the short edge to form a loop. My neckband is only 2 inches or 5 centimeters wide because that's how I wanted it. And I'm sewing the shorter edge of both cuffs. This edge is called the shorter edge, even if it's not shorter. If you're in doubt, check the stretch of the fabric. Your cuffs must stretch horizontally, they don't have to stretch vertically. So the cuff as sewn must stretch from side to side or around your wrist. And the other one, the other cuff. When we have the cuffs sewn in loops, we can turn them to the right side and fold them in half. We can fold the neckband in half, wrong sides together, in the same way. Like that. So our cuffs and our neckband are done. Now my favorite thing to sew, the belt. It's basically a long piece of fabric, so it's a pure pleasure of sewing. I fold the belt right sides together, but I don't need to fold it all at once. I use my hands to fold it as I sew. If you're worried you can't fold it as you go, press it along all the length. But as ever, try to sew in sections. You can add notches to your belt and practice matching the notches when you are stitching. It's a brilliant practice actually. I'm going to close one short end of my belt, as I'm going to use my prym loop turner set, and for this way of loop turning, one side of the loop needs to be closed, or the stick would simply fall out of the tube. So this is a very long loop, but I really like doing it, as it always makes me giggle. You can have a laugh too, I don't mind. You can use a plastic straw or a narrow cardboard tube and a chopstick in the same way. But this set is not expensive and I find it very useful. I put the tube into my belt to the very end, then using the stick I push the fabric from the top to the inside and I just keep rolling the fabric down and pushing the stick and the tube further and further. I know it's very funny. The stick and the tube are pushed in the opposite directions, so the fabric is turning as we do so. With long loops, you need to release the folds at the back because there would be too much fabric to keep moving. I think this is a super easy and fast way of loop turning. And it releases any stress we've accumulated during the day. Finally, I need to get the stick from the inside out, because I don't want to sew my loop shut, only to find there is a piece of wood in my belt. I'll close the end of my belt on my lock stitch machine. My next sewing station is the lock stitch or regular sewing machine, and apart from closing the end of the belt, I'm going to use it to attach my belt tunnel. We have seam allowances pressed under, and I want my tunnel to be inside. That's why I have eyelets installed in my dress front. I'm folding the short ends of my tunnel under because my tunnel ends are not going to overlap. I find it easier to pull the belt inside the tunnel if I can open the tunnel itself. You don't have to do it like that. You can overlap the short ends of your tunnel and have it closed. You will then use the eyelets only to thread the belt through. A word of warning though, when you wash your dress, tie the belt ends in a knot, because if they get pulled into the tunnel during the washing, you'll spend some time threading them through the eyelets again. Or you can use plastic cord stoppers. Right, I'd better tell you what I'm doing. I'm using a safety stretch stitch, the one that goes forward, back and forward and looks like a straight stitch. My stitch length is 4. You can use your favorite stretch stitch, or because the dress has enough ease, you can get away with a straight stitch. I'm also using a jersey needle size 90 or 14 if you prefer. As you remember, I had drawn a straight line across my dress front and back. I used a water-soluble pen for that. I'm aligning the tunnel edge with this line and sewing close to the edge, about 3 mm from the edge. A few centimeters before the end of my stitch line, I fold the short end of the tunnel under. Then I move to the other long edge of my tunnel and sew it in the same way. I don't need any lines marked there. The tunnel is flat, so it does the job for itself. As I say, I'm making sure the fabric and the tunnel are flat, nothing is folded under or getting in my way of stitching. I sew in sections. I don't care about the whole world, just about the few centimeters I'm working on at any given moment. And back to the overlocker, I'm going to set my sleeves in now. I'm going to sew in the round, matching notches and the side seams. I'm putting my sleeve inside the dress, right sides together, matching my notches and sewing. I start from the sleeve head, making sure I'm not flattening my gathers, and of course matching the side seams when I get to them. Remember to match the side seams in the seam allowances, not just at the very edge of the fabric. By the way, the tape I used on my sleeve heads is called either forming tape or foam tape interfacing in the UK, and as far as I know is made by Prym. This video is unfortunately not sponsored by Prym. I just happen to have quite a few things from this brand. One sleeve is nearly done. I actually find it much easier to sew sleeves in jersey like that, but most people don't. So if you don't like it, sew them flat. The other sleeve, again, put the sleeve inside the dress, right sides facing each other, match the notches and the side seams, start from the head and sew. I'm trimming all my rogue threads so I can see my notches and the fabric edges better. Okay, let's go from the head, in the round, the other sleeve. As you do it, you can control the ease of your sleeve. Also, make sure as always that nothing is twisted and only the edges that you are actually sewing are under the foot. As my teacher would say, keep your station nice and tidy. We're getting closer and closer to the end. The fabric I'm using is cotton-based French terry from dark violet prints. I talked about this fabric in my video with yuzu coat. It's Ghibli Mush. I absolutely love it. It's nice and soft, and as you can see, it sews well. Okay, so the neckband now. I'm making 2 notches, one marking the center back and one the center front. I'm going to match my notches with the seam of the neckband. That's what my center back notch is for. And the neckband half, as measured from the seam. So I'm matching the neckbands and the necklines halves. I'm putting the neckband inside the dress, right sides together. The neckband is folded in half along the long edge. If your print is directional, make sure the neckband, when sewn in, will be the right side up, not upside down. I'm matching my notches and starting a few centimeters before my neckband seam, sewing the neckband in the round. I'm pulling gently on the neckband, stretching it as I sew, so the dress is eased into the neckband evenly without any puckers. I normally match the neckband seam with my body's shoulder seam, but this neckband has similar curves at the front and the back, so the center back seam of the neckband will make it easier to know where the back is. I can of course use my label for that as well. The edges of my fabric curl, so I need to be extra careful. And now the cuffs. Again, I'm using a different method of gathering the sleeve hems into the cuffs. So feel free to follow the pattern's instructions and gather the sleeve hems first and then sew them to the cuffs. I'm putting the cuff inside the sleeve, right sides facing. The cuff is folded in half. I don't need any notches as the cuffs are narrow and I can see the halves. The way I gather my sleeve here is by using the differential feed on my machine. If you're using a domestic overlocker, you can do this by turning the differential knob to 2. The bottom feed dogs are moving twice as fast as the top ones, so the fabric placed against the bottom feed dogs is gathered. If you have never used this method before, practice first. Bell sleeves are quite voluminous, so there is a lot of gathering. And you need to know your machine to be able to control this process. I'm pulling slightly on my cuffs because I need to ease in much more than twice the amount of fabric. Also, this is a very powerful machine, so I know I can't do it. Of course, don't forget to match your seams in the seam allowance. I do like using the differential because it makes gathering super fast and easy, but it does require some practice, as everything in sewing. Okay, the cuffs are done, the seams are matching, and everything looks okay, so we can move on to the finishes. Before I go to the cover stitch machine to top stitch the neckband and hem the dress, I'm going to check if the gathers are even, the side seams are properly matched, and I don't have to do any unpicking and correcting any mistakes. I'm happy with the results, so my last change of my sewing station today, the cover stitch machine. I'm using 3 needles cover stitch. I set my hemming guide for a 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch hem. So the slider is 2.5 centimeters from my outer left needle, and I'm hemming in the round. Of course, you can do a blind hem or use your regular sewing machine to hem your dress. I've trimmed my little tails and I can finish. That's my hem done, and I can now top stitch the neckband using my cover stitch machine as well. I'm just going to show you that the side seams in the armholes are matching, so there is no reason not to set the sleeves in jersey garments. Okay, let's top stitch the neckband and our dress is going to be ready. I'm not using any guides for that. I'm adjusting the slider on my hemming guide, but I'm not really going to use it. I find it easier to sew to the gauge, so to use my foot as a reference where to sew. My seam allowances are facing towards the dress, and I'm top stitching through all the layers. It makes the neckband sit perfectly flat. I can finish now, and then I'm going to trim the little tails. I should have trimmed them earlier, but they're still here. I'm going to cut them off. This machine locks the stitches, so I don't have to do anything. I have a video for domestic cover stitches showing how to start and how to finish cover stitching, so you can watch it if you use a domestic cover stitch machine. My dress is now ready. I need to press it properly and put my belt into the tunnel, and it's going to be ready to wear. In reality, it wasn't me who made this dress. It was Lily. She has done everything with her little paws. Well, she was mainly getting in my way.